Welcome to Profit Led, a podcast by and for bootstrapped founders brave or crazy enough to grow a business to profitability with very few resources. Profit Led is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform built to save you from doing the same webinar over and over again, from sales demos to customer onboarding to training. This season, Profit Led's host Melissa Kwan, who is also co-founder and CEO of eWebinar, will walk you step-by-step through the company's journey to $1 million. Melissa is a 3-time bootstrapper who has spent 13 years building startups. Together with co-host and eWebinar COO Todd Parmley, they will dive into one major topic per episode, sharing war stories, mistakes, and lessons learned as they grew the company to $1 million in annual recurring revenue 36 months after product launch. So buckle up, fellow bootstrappers. It's gonna be one heck of a ride.
Welcome to Profit Led Season 2, our journey to $1 million, Episode 12. I'm Melissa Kwan, co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host, and I'm here with my co-host, Todd Parmley, eWebinar's COO. Hey, Todd, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you? It's good to do another episode.
I'm good. So today I am sitting here at my home in Amsterdam, where I'm spending less and less time. And last time we chatted, you were saying how you have a trip to Europe planned because you managed to get out to Bangkok that last time. And now it's kind of got your travel bug running again.
Yeah, for sure. It really felt like, why don't I do this all the time? So the plan now is probably in the 1st of September, because that's when we're free, is we'll fly into Barcelona, take a train into France, and then rent a car and do like a south of France road trip somewhere. So that's the plan.
Well, for anyone listening, August is the worst time to travel around Europe because all the kids are out of school and everybody takes the entire August off. You can do that in Europe. Everything will be full, including all the beaches, and everything will be very expensive.
We're landing like September 1st or something, so that we're getting the best of the weather and avoiding the worst of the crowds. So hopefully it'll work.
Do you have your route planned at all?
Sort of. Jeff has some clients who live in south of France, so they're trying to hook us up in some insider stuff. So we have a basic itinerary. Well, we're going to spend like 2 days in towns getting across to closer to Nice, and then somewhere around Nice, we'll set up some place to hang out for like a week, and then use that as like a jumping off point for all the surrounding areas. Because it's just, you forget when you live in the U.S. Everything's so far apart in the U.S.
I know. I was built for cars.
I was looking at these travel times between these cities. I'm like, 30 minutes? Like, what are you talking about? So,
yeah, I mean, David and I went on a road trip in Spain last week, and we didn't really pick a route. We basically just started driving and saw kind of what was on the way. I have a lot of travel hacks on how to get the best deals and things like that. So I'll definitely send all those to you, having traveled probably pretty consistently for the last 5-6 years. So in the last episode, we talked about how you can leverage your best customers to sell your product. So getting value propositions, benefits, things like that, and then turning that into pieces of content, the value in the process of running customer interviews to extract every bit of information from them. And on today's episode, we're going to dive into something that I write a lot about on LinkedIn and talk about on social media platforms like Instagram and YouTube, how to stay super lean, especially as a bootstrap startup. But I guess staying super lean is the essence of any bootstrap startup.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in a lot of small startups before. Not a lot. 2, I would say, would be considered bootstrapped. But I think the difference and the thing that I like about being here, which is something I learned from you, is about focusing so much on revenue. When you're focused on generating revenue, you become extremely focused on what you spend your time and money on. Mostly because it means you're not spending your time and money on something else. So to get started, since you're the queen of bootstrapping, I've heard, that's what people say.
That's the brand I'm going for.
What does it mean to you to stay super lean? What does that mean?
I think if I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be stretching your runway for as long as possible. I remember a long time ago, one of my friends said to me, your only job as a CEO is to make sure you never run out of money. And I think that's true for any size of a company, right? But especially as a bootstrap company where you don't have a line of credit, nobody will give you a loan, you're starting off and you don't have all this revenue. You need to stretch the runway that you have for as long as possible. What bootstrapping does not mean is being as cheap as possible and spending the least whenever you can, because being cheap can be the most expensive. And I only know that because I've made those mistakes in my previous startups. And there are only 2 ways to get to profitability. which is increasing revenue and decreasing cost. Bootstrapping is not just about spending as little as possible. It's also about how do you maximize revenue at the same time. So only by doing that can you stretch your runway. So it also means, optimizing your cost as you build up revenue, because it's going to take 2 to 3 times longer than you think. Like, it always will. I didn't think that. And it's still I thought that it would take 1 year to get to $1 million, but it took 3, not 2.5, but 3 solid years. It means being prepared for the unexpected, right? Not just how long things take, but how much it takes for someone to pay you, right? How much investment into the product you're going to have to put for someone to put in their credit card. It means being prepared for market conditions and things you have absolutely no control over. You can have an amazing product, but something like the pandemic happens, things that you can't control. So how do you stretch your runway as a bootstrap company? I think that bootstrapping is not this thing you do. It's not like a checklist of things that you do, but it's the way you choose to build your company. It's like the way of life, right? It's a philosophy of how you choose to build your company, how you make decisions. It's your culture on how you hire people, and all of those things have to trickle down to your team, because how they act and how they make decisions has a direct impact on how much revenue you make and how much money to spend and how much money you can spend. And a lot of this actually comes with experience, right? You need to make a lot of mistakes. And a lot of those mistakes are with people, because people are your most costly expense, right? Both in time and money. So how do you find people who are good at what they do and will stay with you? How do you hire and when do you fire? And how do you retain the best to save on rehiring and training costs?
How would you say we go about doing this? Because I agree with you. It is a mindset. It's like a lens through which you see everything. So all of your decisions are being filtered through this lens. So it is a day-to-day kind of attitude you have to adopt. But in more practical terms, what are some of the things that we do to stay lean?
I mean, let's break it down, right? To the things that are first core to our business. So core to our business means things we can't live without. Operations, it starts with a lawyer. Your incorporation, your shareholders agreement, any important documents, it might be your subscription agreements. All of these things become so important when you sell. So yes, there are templates on all this stuff that you can download on the internet, but you should be hiring a lawyer, ideally a startup lawyer that knows what they're doing. So you're not trying to backtrack on a lot of this stuff, right? It's too expensive to backtrack. And the other thing in operations that's core is your accountant. You do not want your books to be complicated or messy, especially if you're going to sell. And you don't want to have to revisit those things 2 years in, because again, it's expensive, because now you're going to have to go back and find all your receipts and backfile your taxes, whatever it might be. In terms of operations, our lawyer and our accountant are 2 jobs, 2 roles that we will not skimp on. I would actually say that those are the 2 roles that we punch above our weight for. So we've always paid more because we want to grow into those roles. And then the other piece is, software, right? The pieces of software that are core to our business. So your Amazon, Vimeo, HubSpot, the things that make up the backbone of your product that you can't live without. So we do not skimp on that, right? We always use the thing that everyone else is using, that is a big company, that's not going to go out of business overnight, things that have 24-hour support, all those things. And the third part is, of course, our CTO. There is no product without a CTO. And so these are, operations, software, and our CTO. These are the things that we are willing to spend the most money on. When I say they're our core, it doesn't mean we're going to spend money on it. Everybody spends money on it. But these are the things that we're willing to spend the most money on. And then the next tier is people. So people that build your product, developers, designers, people that work on our marketing. So write content, SEO, people that sell. It could be myself, or a sales coordinator, which we had in the beginning when we were trying different sales tactics. And then it could be your jack of all trades. And in this case, it was you. So when we look at the people that we need to involve to build our business and our product, I would ask myself, what can we afford to spend? What and who is the best person that we can get with what we can afford to spend? And what is their output going to be? How efficient and effective are they going to be? And how can we make it such that we can build a team of happy people that want to stay, instead of a bunch of people that feel like they're sacrificing a real salary to work for your startup. And this is the single hardest thing as a bootstrap company is how do you attract and retain talent when you do not have top dollar to compete with Amazon or Facebook or another startup, right? And this is something that we talked about in the earlier episodes is like, how do you build a team with limited resources?
I mean, because it really is much more about money or much less about money than you'd think. As a bootstrap startup, you could only pay so much for people. But if you want the best for you, I would say the trick is figuring out, I mean, for me personally, it was a lot about mission. It was a lot about like lifestyle that I would have the freedom to make my own schedule. I certainly never feel micromanaged. For me, it was about ownership. Like so much of the time, if you're in the corporate world, it's just like you never feel like you own anything. It's just a quagmire of red tape. So whatever that is for the people you're trying to find, I think most people would assume that it's mostly about money. And I actually don't think that's the case.
Especially for a startup, it's not about money. And in terms of spending on people, I made a decision from day one, before I even incorporated this company, that my next company would be 100% outsourced because I wanted only to build a bootstrap company that had a remote team because I was nomading and I wanted to be remote. But I learned from my previous startups that I'm just not a great people manager. Like I love creating products, I love selling, but I don't know how to have hard conversations. I'm not good at management. I'm not good at hiring, firing, having confrontations. I knew going into like before I even came into eWebinar that I was only going to outsource 100% through whether it's through an agency that hires contractors or development agency or we go directly to the contractor. Like I already knew that. But if you're willing to outsource and hire anyone anywhere in the world based on mission and vision and expertise, then you can actually cut down a lot of your hiring costs. And that I would say is our biggest strategy or best strategy to stay super lean. And of course, we could afford to sacrifice having quote unquote the best developers because David was and is so good at what he does. Like that's our CTO. He actually codes himself. So because of him, we were able to hire a team in Vietnam that yes, requires a lot more handholding than maybe a team in Eastern Europe or Colombia or in the US. And that was a massive saving.
Yeah. And David helps lift the developers to a higher, I know that they've become much, much stronger coders since working here. That's also why people join startups sometimes too, is from what they can learn. And, I think it's important to point out that like hiring anywhere in the world never to us was about taking advantage of people in a market that, you could pay less. It was about, we can actually pay them above what other people might be paying them in that market just because they can, because we want them to stay. We want them to be happy and have a life and stay.
Getting people to stay is a cost saving strategy as well, right? Retraining someone, finding someone, creating that loyalty and that passion, it takes time. And so my last interview question with anyone is, what would you say is a high salary for you? And I ask that not because I want to pay the least. It's because I want to have an idea of how they can have a great life at the stage they're in now in their life stage. And can we afford it? Can we exceed it? And if this person's going to work out, how much more can we pay them above what they think is a high salary? Because they know that most other companies are actually trying to optimize to pay them the least. Right. And in fact, like we had one of the best people that we hired, like literally off the street, like this 20-some-year-old kid wants to be a developer, has no experience, taught himself how to code. And he was in Turkey. And that's where we met him. He was going to work in a coffee shop. And we asked him, like, if we were to hire you to take over customer support just to try it out and maybe build you into a developer, how much would you need to get paid? Like, what is the average salary of someone your age where you live? And he said $600, $600 US. I mean, to most companies, they'd be like, perfect, done, pay you $600. But that was just ridiculous, right? So we actually paid him double, which was still kind of ridiculous for the rates that we're used to. But we didn't know him at all, right? We wanted to try him out. We wanted to see if he was as smart as and as self-motivated as we thought he would be. And he was. And in month 2, we doubled it. And then we doubled it again. And he's only been with us for, 6-7 months now. But I assure you that this guy is not leaving. And we could pay him less and he would still not leave, right? So like it definitely for us, it's not about trying to optimize for least amount. It's about paying people with their expertise what they are worth rather than convincing someone that we can't afford to half their salary to work for a startup because we can't afford them.
Yeah. And also, it's funny how, like, when you do that kind of thing, you would almost assume, at least in sort of a traditional corporate mindset, that if you pay people so much more, they'll actually become demotivated to do less. But this guy is becoming more motivated the more he's being valued. Like, he's feeling incredibly valued, and that has contributed to his motivation and his desire to stay.
It blows my mind when companies don't see that, right? And I don't necessarily agree, okay, if you pay people more, like in corporate, they might be more demotivated, right? It's almost like how much more. So let's say an executive is making $200,000, you pay them $220,000. Doesn't really make a huge difference. But if you're paying them $500,000, like, I'm pretty sure that their productivity is going to go up. Their ownership, their accountability is going to go up, right? I remember seeing this LinkedIn post by a fairly internet famous entrepreneur that said, the best person on your team or the best person on my team is 10 times more productive than the average person on the team. So then I commented and I was like, how much more are you paying that person? And he danced around it for a little bit. And then he was like, well, we already offer what we call like grade A salary. I'm like, so you're saying that you're recognizing your best person is 10 times more productive, but you're not even paying them double. That's insane to me. Because what I would do is fire half that team, pay that person double, and then they can refer more people that are like them. And then I pay them double. So I think for me, at least as a bootstrap founder, my goal is to have the smallest team possible, but the most productive and effective team, and then pay them more so that they don't leave. And I never have to hire again.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate something you said before, because when you lose someone in such a small team, it's always hard when someone transitions at a company for the people. But in a team of our size, when we lose someone, it is so painful. Oh my God, it is so painful. And so, like, that's the other part of it, like, in terms of it being a cost-saving exercise to pay people well and make sure that they're happy. You're also trying to avoid that because it can be devastating for a small team.
Yeah. And another thing about, like, going back to how do we determine, what and who to spend money on and how much, right? I would first ask myself, like, what are the functions that are absolutely necessary, especially in the beginning? Like, do we need this? What can we delay? That was my own salary. Right, my own pay. And that's what it means to be a founder. That's what it means to be a CEO. That's why you have the most equity. That's what sweat equity is about. And in the beginning, it was also delaying hiring you because we could have been able to afford you, I think, with the revenue that we had, comfortably hire you for 6 months. But then I'm shortening my runway. So even though I knew that you would have a huge impact for us if you worked for us full time, like, just for context for people that didn't listen to the earlier episodes, is you had a full-time job elsewhere and you are working for us as a consultant. But if we were to bring you on as a full-time, we would at least have to match 75% of the salary that you were getting. But that would shorten our runway from a year to 6 months. So we needed to delay you, but we still worked on a way that we could collaborate on your quote unquote spare time. And we also asked ourselves, how can we get the highest ROI by spending this kind of money, right? The highest return for your dollar spent. So we learned, over some painful spending mistakes, that we can really only afford to hire senior people who can hit the ground running because it takes a shorter time for them to get onboarded. And onboarding time is also a cost. People that are too junior or don't have enough experience that just get it right away is a cost because their chance of leaving is higher, right? Because we are remote teams. So the more junior you are, the more you might need to learn from other people around you. So we don't provide that environment. And we've had that happen to us multiple times. And now we're like, well, we should just invest more in hiring more senior people with more experience so they don't just leave us. And then it also takes a lot more lift to train a junior person. So now it's like a double whammy where you spend a lot of time training them and they're not engaged because it's not fun for them and they don't have a social environment. I think everybody hears about a remote company and they're enamored in the beginning, but then they realize, oh, it's actually quite lonely and nobody ever talks to each other, and then they leave, right? So we really look at highest skill and capability of that role for the dollar that we're able to spend. And we never, ever pay the least because, like I said, being cheap is the most expensive. So for example, like our designer is $1,000 a day, but we only need him once in a while, right? But he's from Apple. So this is a guy that looks at something, hears a concept, and gets it done in a day or a day and a half or 2 days max. Whereas as a junior designer, I could be ripping my hair out for 3 months, hiring this person for, a retainer on $2,000 to $3,000 a month, and have that person still not give me the output of a designer that's worked for Apple and spent 20 years in design. So that's kind of how we think about optimizing costs as well, is like, what is the highest ROI that we can get for these dollars spent? And also, we only hire when absolutely necessary. So what does that mean, right? When not hiring means we're hitting diminishing returns. I only asked you to join full time when I could no longer handle the workload. Like, I didn't even know what I was doing anymore because there were so many things on my plate, and so much of it was creating content and operations and PMing and QAing that I needed your help to take all of that off my plate so I can go and find more customers and do sales and marketing, which is where, I excel.
It's not so much a caveat. It's like, I'm trying to think of some of there's a couple people that we've hired that I think in the bigger corporate world would be considered more junior, but they were like, I know this might sound stupid, but they were senior for where they are in their careers, and they were punching above their pay grade already. And it has to do with self-motivation, the ability to understand a concept quickly, to absorb it quickly. So there are cases in which we've taken people with less experience maybe, but that's what they've made up for with that self-motivation, ability to grasp things quickly, because that also too is worth so much. Because then, it does take longer to onboard them, but once it's done, it's done.
Yeah. And I would say, it's definitely something that we look out for is like capability and intelligence and self-motivation. And we have lucked out on a couple people with that, like not a lot of work experience, not very senior, but highly capable and highly intelligent. But we've also been burned, right? So, and here, then that's the thing about bootstrap companies is you have to try, and then you have to learn how to fire very, very quickly, which is something I've had to learn as well. And I've been in startups for over 10 years.
And by the way, you would only hire someone that was, quote unquote, a little bit more junior. We were 100% confident that we understood the process that they were going to be managing, right? We would never hire somebody to figure something out that we didn't already understand ourselves. So like we brought in someone to help me with content marketing, with writing, right? I would never have been comfortable doing that until I felt comfortable and confident that I could guide that person myself.
Because in the beginning, we did hire a lot of different marketing agencies to kind of remove that pain. And it was only because nobody could actually deliver on their promise that we decided to own that process. But we're diving into that in the next episode, actually. Stay tuned. And another place we optimize on costs is time, right? So the question that you have to ask yourself is, how can I spend the least amount of time on the business and get the highest output? Like, so what does that mean? I don't believe that we have to work more. We have to work more creatively. Working more does not mean you will be more successful, right? But working smart and working creatively does mean that. And it also means that you're freeing up your time to work on other things. And optimizing on time also means minimizing human interactions as much as possible. So how do we do that at eWebinar is everything you need is on our website. You do not need to book a call with us, because if you need to book a call with us, I am the person that you need to book a call with. And I have made a promise to myself for this company that I will not take any live calls, no sales calls, no customer support. I don't care how big your company is. I will not take that call, because that interferes with the lifestyle that I want to live.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's not no customer support. It's no customer support by live calls.
Yeah, no customer calls. Yeah. Those would be the worst. I used to do that in my last company, and they were like the worst. Because actually, not a lot of tech companies offer phone support. So when someone gets you on the phone, they'd be like, oh, well, now that I have you on the phone, do you know like what to do with Facebook? Like that actually happens, because now there's a person that's techie on the other side. But information transparency means all pricing, all features, the demo that you can join, every single thing that a customer needs to make a decision is on our website. So now we've eliminated all sales interactions. And the other place where we optimize on time and also costs as a result is lowering support in general. So any tickets that come in. So especially in the beginning, when questions start to repeat themselves, that's how we prioritize writing articles on our knowledge base. And we still do that. So what are the questions that we're getting over and over? We immediately write an article. We can make a webinar. We can make a video, like whatever we need to copy and paste a link to respond to a question. That's what we do, right? We try to type as little as possible.
Yeah, it also influenced our product decisions, right? Because if we saw something coming in all the time, we're like, why aren't people understanding how to do this? We would then solve that problem. So, whether we were doing it in the product, in our support content, whatever we were doing, it was about reducing support.
Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, and it's also automating as much as possible, right? So whatever business process we have that a robot can do, we're going to let a robot do it. It's also saying no to things that do not increase revenue and profit or lower cost, right? So in the beginning, there's going to be so many things that you want to invest in, so many things that you want to do, so many things you want to build, but unless it increases revenue, we can't do it. And that was a big, decision-making factor that I used in my last startup and something that I brought into this startup as well. And, something that I've had to get better at was also delegating what I wasn't great at. The things that I was spending a lot of time on. So it might take me, 3 hours to write an article, but it'll take you 1 hour, right? So I'm not going to continue to do that task. I'm going to find someone who can actually do that task at 3 times faster than me. But it also means doubling down on what I am good at, what we are all good at. So part of my job as a founder is to see, okay, what are the things that are weighing you down? What are the things that are weighing David down? Who do we hire to take that away from him or from you so that you guys can be more effective at your job? I ask David probably once every 2-3 months, is there anyone else we can bring on your team? He manages the development team to reduce your workload. And for a long time, it was customer support. It was tech support because he was the only person that was technical enough. But we didn't have someone that was good enough to and wanted to stay to take over that role. And now that we have, he doesn't even look at support anymore. So we can move a lot faster, right? And there are also things that David doesn't like to do. Right? He doesn't like DevOps. And we had a guy that was doing it, but they fired us because we were only hiring one guy from that agency and it was a minimum of 2, so we couldn't keep that guy on board. But now all that work is now back in his bag. So I'm constantly asking him, okay, if we hire that person, how much workload will that take away? And at this point, he's still saying, it would actually take more brain power for me to train that person than to just do it myself. Being lean and being bootstrapped means constantly asking yourself and your team those questions so you can be as efficient as possible and grow as quickly as possible and generate revenue as quickly as possible, right? It doesn't mean hiring the least amount of people because you will hit diminishing returns, right? We can probably cut our team in half, but all of us will be doing more and then actually be doing less because we're going to be so much more exhausted and maybe just hate our jobs. Whereas right now we get to focus on the things that we're good at and actually feel more successful.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. It is about efficiency. So, it's never about spending the least amount. It's never about having the least amount of people. It's the least amount of spend and people for what that will keep you the most efficient. Like it's the wrong way to think about it if you're just trying to be cheap.
Have you been in truly bootstrapped startups in the past?
There were 2. One where I'm sure it was bootstrapped. but nothing was transparent with me in terms of knowing how bootstrapped we were, how that reflected on the amount of runway we had. I never felt the urgency of being bootstrapped. And it wasn't like I was sitting there wasting my time, but actually connecting the actual amount of resources we have and runway that we have in front of us has been extremely helpful, because I feel it's not even pressure. It's like knowing what the reality is affects my decision making. So I think that what was missing at those places is that, whether they were trying to hide I don't think it was necessarily trying to hide, but it would have been much more effective for me because I was in senior positions at these, so in positions where it would have been appropriate and helpful. And I didn't even really know to ask those questions. If I were ever in that situation again now, I'd be like, I need to know these things. So that's really the difference, is that, I never really felt the urgency of the bootstrap.
And that's a good point, right? Because part of my philosophy of building this business and part of how I think about building a bootstrap company is I want to build a company where everyone feels like they're part of it, like they're contributing, because they are. Part of making people feel accountability and ownership is transparency. Right? Everybody sees the Stripe channel, like they know how much money we're making if they want to. We're not really hiding anything. We even publicly talk about our revenue. You can't build a bootstrap company as a single founder who wants to do it. You need every single person to have that mindset and to be on board with you, because how they think about running your business, what they spend on, do they cancel subscriptions that we're not using, is also something that is ingrained in your culture. In my last startup, unfortunately, my co-founder didn't have the same mindset. Of course, he had a similar mindset, but not to my extent. And it would drive me crazy when I'm like, okay, well, cancel this subscription. And 3 months later, I'm still seeing it on the Visa bill. I'm like, why didn't you cancel it? And it might be like $99 or something, but it would just drive me nuts. Because I wasn't paying myself, I was paying everybody else. And while it's just $99, it's a reflection of much larger things, right? How you do anything is how you do everything. So how do you carry that culture into the rest of your team? And I have very open discussions on like, hey, should we spend money on this or not? And even when you and Jake sign up for different marketing software, right? You guys are comparing, this cost versus this cost, and we're going to save this much. And I don't think that's normal for most teams, most companies, but I'd like to think that we've created a culture where people are very cost conscious because they know the position that we're in. And I think we also make them feel like that they are part of this company, not just as a team member, but really contributing to the growth of this company.
I mean, I think there's even something a little deeper in here, which is that when you recognize your limited resources and you can see them in a way that you're like, we can do this or this, but not both, your creativity kicks in. You become a more innovative thinker because of the restraints that you have. I mean, what is it, the saying, necessity is the mother of invention? Like, that is right. I mean, I've experienced that through every aspect of my life.
I absolutely think that bootstrap companies create better products faster. I mean, because we have to. Right? We have to rely on the value that we create for customers for them to pay us. We don't have the luxury of buying users and putting out ads. In fact, we don't put out any ads, right? So we have to build a really amazing product to keep customers there. And there is beauty in that, right? Everything you invest in, you kind of see the return or no return, right away. And most of our team, if they want to, can get that information without talking to us.
So everything we've been talking about sounds very reasonable, but I know that we've made a ton of mistakes, a ton of money mistakes. What mistakes do you want to bring up and how others could avoid them?
Yeah, I mean, I know that we sound like we know exactly what we're doing, right? For optimizing costs and finding revenue and bootstrapping, but everybody makes mistakes. I've been making these mistakes for 10 years. Just because you make mistakes doesn't mean you're not doing something right. It's part of building a business. The first and biggest mistake that I made was being way too optimistic on financial projections, right? I really, truly thought that we were going to get to $1 million in a year because I was so connected to the problem that I couldn't believe people didn't want to buy this right away. And so I had my financial projections for hitting $1 million in a year. And I put in the money that I did and also, David and some friends and family funding based on those projections. And so when your projections are too optimistic, what does that mean? It means you would be too liberal in spending money leading up to profitability. So in the beginning, I spent way more than we should have because I thought we were going to get to a certain revenue faster. And then after rolling out eWebinar, I realized how hard it was going to be to sell. So then we had to scale way back on our spend and really tighten our belts again and think about, okay, do we really need this role? Right? Do we really need to hire this agency? Right? Who else can do this job? Another mistake was hiring for specific roles and senior roles too early, right? And also that has a lot to do with being optimistic, right? Too optimistic on the business. So you think the business is growing faster than it is, or people are going to like it more than they do. And then you hire people that are senior in their positions to help you grow faster. And those people are really expensive. But we hadn't found product market fit. I don't even think we have product market fit today, even though we have business. So we're talking on this podcast, maybe 1 or 2 years in, definitely not having product market fit, but hiring people that have only grown startups that have product market fit. It was a pretty big hiring mistake.
And I think people who've worked in corporate environments as well, I mean, in some ways, the higher you get up in corporate, the less you do things on the ground. And that becomes really problematic. So when we talk about hiring senior people, I think that's normally in the context of senior people who've worked in startups and understand that works. Because you can hire somebody who's had a ton of experience in larger companies. They come to a startup and they just are waiting for things to be done.
Yeah. And outside of that context, just to give an example for listeners here, it's also consultants that have taken companies from 1 to 2, but not from 0 to 1. So not so senior that they've worked in, an SAP or corporate, but senior enough that they have not worked with a startup of our stage. And going from 0 to 1 just requires such a different mindset and patience. I think patience is also a skill. So hiring people that have only worked with startups from 1 to 2, and they weren't seeing success, so everybody was demotivated, but we had to pay them what they were worth because they have had success, just not in this category, right? So senior, I think, is a broad term. And then also hiring friends and vetting the whole, skipping the whole vetting process, not firing fast enough for a lot of these people and knowing that they weren't going to work out, but keeping them on board because I emotionally did not know how to confront that. And, that's a big learning as well. But also hiring people to take away our pain, right? As we talked about earlier, we hired so many marketing consultants and agencies to remove this SEO pain, right? Remove the content pain. But we had no idea who we were hiring for. So then we were just burning cash on people to figure out what we needed to do when we really should have just owned it ourselves, right? So really spent a lot of money on that.
We also didn't really understand what the definition of success would look like for us, right? So we relied on them to define what success would look like. And half the times we left sort of baffled, but wait, does that actually make us money? And, so those were big learnings for us.
Yes. And this is not a mistake that we made, but a lot of mistakes that I see in other companies is not being revenue focused enough, right? Wanting to build a nifty product, but not thinking about how the market is going to receive it and will the market pay for it. I think a lot of non-sales driven founders tend to they're kind of product people, right? So they want to build a product that solves a problem, but they're not thinking about maybe the features that they need to have in there and how they craft their pitch so that somebody will buy it. So not being revenue focused enough is I think a lot of startups fall into that. But I would say these are kind of the top 3 money mistakes is being way too optimistic about your financial projections, how quickly you're going to make money, all the mistakes on hiring people, whether it's the wrong person, wrong time, or not getting rid of them fast enough. And then not being revenue focused enough.
So do you have any other tips about how bootstrap startups can avoid running out of money? What would you say to help people stay focused?
Yeah, I would say the most important thing when you don't want to run out of money, because as a CEO, that's your most important job, is to make sure there's always money in the bank, is to make sure that your idea, your product can be commercialized from day one. So if you want to go into a blue ocean opportunity, right? If you want to create a new category, ask yourself, do you really want to do that? because nobody's spending money on buying the thing you're creating right now. So what's the alternative? Creating a product or a business that already exists today and making it 10 times better, right? So maybe a purple ocean or even a red ocean opportunity. Create something that people are already spending money on. It's a better CRM or a better product or a project management software, something that people are already spending money on that you can compete, right? Because if it's brand new, you're competing for budget where their mind is not at. And of course, be hyper-focused on revenue, which we've already talked about, but also be hyper-focused on optimizing your burn, optimizing on, do you really need to hire that person right now? Spend money on that campaign. Are you really going to spend money on ads? Have you exhausted every single channel to find demand before you spend money, like just burning money on Google or LinkedIn or wherever you're spending? And also, as soon as you have some significant revenue, like let's say even 20, 30,000, get non-dilutive funding as soon as you can, right? Get a line of credit approved. We use CapChase for that because no institution will lend you money when you need it. So you need to make sure that you have a credit line when you don't need it. And then when you need it, you can pull it whenever you want. And this is something that was taught to me in my last startup. It was like a guy he was actually really good at getting government grants and loans and like hacking his way to leverage. But his whole thing was you need to get money when you're doing well because no one's going to listen to you when you're not.
I mean, it seems really obvious when you say it that way. Well, I think that's probably an okay place to wrap up. Just to summarize what we've talked about. We talked about what it means to stay lean today, what we have done and do to stay lean, what we do and don't spend money on, and some of the mistakes that we've made with our money. So what's your hot take for our listeners?
Yeah, my hot take is just to reiterate that staying lean is not a thing that you do. It's not a checklist. Staying lean, especially in Bootstrap Startup, is the philosophy by which you choose to build your company. It's a practice, right? It's like meditation and like working out. It's training that muscle that you make decisions with every single day, right? It's constantly asking, how do I maximize revenue and lower costs? What are the levers that impact revenue and costs? And how do I optimize on those things every day with every decision? And then how do I get the rest of my team to act like me and to think like me? And what's yours?
Well, I mean, just for the record, you got me to do it. So you did succeed with that. To be fair, I mean, this is one of the biggest learnings I've had here, right? So I've always, I've been self-motivated. I get things done. But I think the thing that's changed for me is the lens, because I mean, you talk about it as like an attitude or a lifestyle way of thinking. For me, it's like it's a very practical lens through which you make decisions. It's like a litmus test. I really try to ask myself, especially when I'm working on product, because it's like you sort of alluded to this early. Product people, we love shiny objects. We love the cool thing, right? But it's like, will this get someone to sign up? Will this feature make someone's life better and prevent them from potentially churning? You can't always ask that on every minor little feature, but certainly as you're creating a roadmap, if you're not using that kind of litmus test to make decisions, then, I mean, I would say now something's wrong. Because if it's not ending up in revenue, either through retention and loyalty or new customers, then what's the point? So I find it incredibly freeing, actually, to have that litmus test, because then it becomes really easy to let go of things. She's like, we don't need that.
It's such a good tiebreaker. And my co-founder and I in the last startup also used this as a tiebreaker, where if we weren't sure if this should go in or not, then the question to ask is, how does this impact revenue, right? Is this going to get another sign up or is it going to make people stay? How is putting this in going to help me close the next deal? If you debate it like that, just as an executive team.
Yeah. I mean, this is how I think of content too. Like, it's a different question, different litmus test, but like, am I writing something that's educating the market about our product, or am I creating fluff content? Like, there's so much fluff content. And that's a term, by the way, that I stole from Grow and Convert. Their blog is amazing. Plug for that. Am I actually making valid, grounded arguments about our product, or am I just blowing smoke? You can sort of apply this mindset as a way to focus you kind of on anything.
Absolutely. Well, I think that was a great conversation. As usual, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn if there are particular topics you want us to get into this season. Send me any feedback you have on this podcast because I love hearing from you. My name is Melissa Kwan, last name spelled Kwan. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, I've got a small favor to ask. The only way this podcast grows is by word of mouth. So if you can do us a favor by hitting the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening or watching this podcast right now, that would be amazing. It would mean the world to us. To be notified of new episodes, join our mailing list by going to profitled.fm. I promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks for listening. Bye now.
Thanks for listening to Profit Led. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to the Profit Led podcast and head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of every episode. You can also join our mailing list to be notified of new episodes or when we have interesting products and resources to share. We promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks again for listening. Bye now.